Welcome. Masal khair. Thank you for joining us. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to this remarkable program today, An Indigenous Revolution, the Literary Amazigization of Morocco. My name is Huda Fakhreddine, and I am the topic director of the Humanities Center for this year. This is in fact the last time I will be presenting to you as topic director of the Humanities Center. We have reached the end. We are very close to the end of our year of revolution. I encourage you all to join us for our very last event, which will be on April 12th, in which our undergraduate fellows will be presenting their work in a symposium that will take place here in the same space, or just look on our website. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the team, the director, Jamal Ilyas, Sarah Varney, Pamela Horn, and Stephen Chavez, who left us recently. Without you, none of this would have been possible. And the work we did this year was necessary. For some of us, a lifeline. Jamal said this once when we were organizing and planning this year, last year. We could never have imagined in our wildest nightmares that the year would unfold the way it did. But still, we spent a year thinking and reflecting on the topic of revolution in specific and general ways with a group of talented fellows and graduate students and colleagues, all while being forced to witness an ongoing genocide. This is day 180 of a genocide unfolding in Gaza before our very eyes. Our relationship with time, with language, with space, with ourselves, with our very bodies, with our children, with our families, these relationships have been transformed forever. But still, we find ourselves gathering in rooms to talk about poetry and translation, as we're going to do today. Our year of revolution has also been a year on the front lines. We found ourselves in this institution fighting to guard a space for free thinking and critical work. And I really hope that the work we did this year has some consequence and will bring some light in a dark, dark world. I've been looking forward to this event especially. Here we are, again, thinking about poetry, about voice, about agency, about selfhood, about identity. And it is my extreme pleasure and honor to welcome Brahim El Guabli, our friend and colleague, to Penn and back to Philadelphia, and thank him for putting this program together. Brahim is a Black and Amazigh Indigenous scholar from Morocco. He is Associate Professor of Arabic Studies and Comparative Literature at Williams College. His first book is entitled Moroccan Other Archives, History and Citizenship After State Violence, which came out from Fordham University Press in 2023. He is currently completing a second book project titled Desert Imaginations, Saharanism and Its Discontents. He is published extensively in places like the LA Review of Books, PMLA, Interventions, the Cambridge Journal of Postcolonial Literary Inquiry, Arab Studies Journal, and others. And he is the co-editor of 2 volumes, Lam Alif, a critical anthology of societal debates in Morocco during the years of lead, from Liverpool University Press 2022, and Reconfiguring Lost Jews in Maghrebi and Middle Eastern Cultural Production from Penn State University Press. It's forthcoming. He is also the co-founder and co-editor of Tamazgha Studies Journal, a peer-reviewed journal that seeks to place the Tamazgha at the heart of academic conversations. Again, for me personally, as a Lebanese and a scholar of Arabic literature, I stand to learn so much from this. We are bringing the margins, which don't necessarily are actual margins, but are perceived as margins, into the light of our knowledge, because many of us are so ignorant of traditions, the diversity of the field that we lump into the label Middle East and North Africa. Brahim is going to be in conversation with 2 remarkable poets, Khadija Ikan, who's joining us via Zoom from Morocco, and Atlas Phoenix, who is joined us here from New York. I will give the floor to Brahim. Please join me in welcoming him. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you so much, Huda. Thank you, Jamal. Thank you, Sarah and Pamela and everybody else who is involved in putting this together. It's a pleasure to come back to Philly and see friends and people I know. And particularly, it's a pleasure to be here in Van Pelt, because this is where I wrote my dissertation. I actually went and visited the Middle East room before you came in. So when Huda wrote to me last summer about this and kind of like talking about revolution, I thought that it would really be like it was an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about Amazigh studies and what Amazigh people are doing, but also to think in the revolution in probably a quieter terms than we usually associate with revolutions. And given everything that's happening around us, I think it's also important to reflect a little bit on indigeneity and what it means and what indigenous people are going through. I thought that I would talk about the revolution that took place in North Africa that probably people don't know about, and that is what I propose to call today the indigenous revolution of Imazigh, or the Amazigh people of North Africa. So for the people who don't know, Amazigh people are the indigenous people of North Africa. They are a millennial people, meaning they've been there for thousands of years. And there has been a discussion whether they were Phoenician, whether they came from Yemen, whether they came from other places. All of that is really conjectural, and really very slim evidence exists where Amazigh come from. But what we know for true and for sure is that Amazigh people are the indigenous people of North Africa. They speak a language called Tamazight, most commonly referred to as Berber, particularly in Roman sources, because the Romans called anybody who did not speak their language or that was outside their borders was called barbaros, or barbarian, or somebody who talked or spoke a language that was not comprehensible to the Romans. If you go to North Africa today, or if you look at sources online, like magazines, journals, you would see some of these pictures, which were growing up in Morocco for me personally. Like this is like a life-changing thing to see that there is a map that reimagines North Africa, for example. We don't call North Africa anymore. We don't call it the Maghreb. We actually call it Tamazgha. And Tamazgha is the Amazigh homeland, which extends from the Canary Islands to Egypt and all the way to sub-Saharan Africa. I will explain the importance of these things. Then you go, for example, to the streets, you see like that there is an art gallery that's written in Arabic, Tamazight, and French. You have the Quran translated into Tamazight, and then you have street signs at a university, at an Algerian city. And to me, this is an amazing re-Amazighization of the public sphere, of the intellectual sphere, of the social sphere. We went from being entirely erased from public life to actually transforming and re-Amazighizing everything. And for me, that's what I call an indigenous revolution. How you go from a state of erasure and complete obliteration in the media, in culture, in high culture, in state institutions, in education, to becoming something that's actually breathing a new life into culture, into society, and into identification and identity. So to just give you a little bit of context, during the colonial times, France enacted what's called the Berber policy, which means that for the French, when they came to North Africa, they saw this difference between Arabs, which means Muslims, and Berbers, or Imazigh. In their mind, they were like, okay, Imazigh are civilizable. We can Gallicize the Berbers, make them French, the same way they made the Jews French, Gallicized the Jews with the Decret Crémieux. They decided that Imazigh are very close and easier to civilize and remove from Islam, whereas Arabs are hopeless. like these people, they destroy civilization. Everything they do, there is no good coming from it. And they created this myth that became the Berber myth that people have already talked about. However, of course, Amazigh did not buy into this thing because Amazigh have never seen themselves as being distinct from Arab or being distinct from Muslims. We are Muslim and Amazigh, but also our world is larger than just our Amazighite. It's also an Arab world. Well, like we have extensions that are in North Africa, but also, no, we are rooted in North Africa, but we are also open to the Arab world. Amazigh were among the primary builders of civilization in Al-Andalus, for example, and that's a Muslim civilization. But the French came with this binary, the separation of Arabs and Amazigh. But the real danger in all of this is that it created a logic that kind of like binary between Amazigh and Arabs and the French and the Arab, but with the idea that the Amazigh can be subsumed under French. And then in the post-independence era, this would have implications because the nationalist movement actually evolved and emerged as a response to the colonial myth of the Amazigh versus the Arab. And then what happens is that Arab nationalism, because most of the Arab leaders of the independence period in North Africa were actually oriented and trained and formed through the Arab nationalism that they encountered in Cairo. So if you think about leaders in Tunisia, leaders in Algeria, leaders in Morocco, including Allal al-Fasi, who was like the leader of Moroccan nationalism, they all lived in Cairo at some point. And then after independence, the emergence of nationalism in the Maghreb emerged as an Arab Islamic nationalism that defined itself as being against the French and by association against Amazigh. So what happens is that the state policies that were enacted after independence were all geared against Amazigh. Tamazigh was not in education, it was not in the media, it was not in the public sphere. It was treated like folklore. And there was a program of Arabization that actually was directed against French. So the public discourse was like, we are going to Arabize everything in order to de-Gallicize Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. But in reality, what happened is the Arabization policy was actually an Arabization of Amazigh, because these people sent their children to French schools. They continued to use French in Moroccan administrations. But in education, they tried to Arabize everyone. And then from the 1900s to now, the number of Amazigh decreased in a place like Morocco from being like 80% of the population to be like something like 45%. You can see like the degree of attrition that happened to the language and the culture and the place of Amazigh in society. So this led to the emergence of an Amazigh consciousness, particularly in the 1960s and the 1970s. So what we call الوعي الأمازيغي أو الوعي بالذات الأمازيغية or Amazigh consciousness started in the it actually started earlier under French colonization, particularly by young Algerian who were educated within the French system. But it really took a different turn in the 1960s with the establishment of what's called l'Académie Berbère, or the Berber Academy, or Al-Académie al-Barbaria in Paris in 1966. This academy would become like the hub that's trained the next generation of Amazigh activists who would actually enact the revolution that I'm talking about. 1 year later, Morocco witnessed the creation of الجمعية المغربية للبحث والتبادل الثقافي, the Moroccan Association for Research and Cultural Exchange in 1967. This association played a major role in transforming Morocco and in shifting the awareness from accepting Arabization as de facto to actually fighting against it and asserting Amazigh linguistic and cultural rights, leading to the transformations that I will be talking about. So to kind of like fast forward, literature played a major role in what we're going to talk about today, particularly because every one of us goes to school to learn. And when you learn at school, you're expecting to learn about your people, about your culture, about your traditions, about who you are, where you come from, to see some great people, great women and men from your tradition. I was schooled within the Moroccan public system. I never encountered any Amazigh thing in the curriculum that trained me personally. It's like the only sentence that we learned was that the Berbers were the original or the indigenous people of North Africa, but then Islam came and Arabic came and everybody became Arab and our identity is Arab and we are Muslims. That's all we learned. And then every idea that we really trained me personally as an intellectual is through Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt. So here is these Amazigh children doing the same thing that the French did, like nos ancêtres les Gaulois. I don't know if you know this joke, like African children would stand up like Black African children would stand up in front of the teacher and say, our ancestors, how do we say les Gaulois in English? Like the Gauls, our ancestors, the Gauls. And I mean, it's such a stark thing to think of the Gauls as these white people and then have African children saying that they're their ancestors. It's the same thing with Amazigh. I think literature really was important for the Amazigh culture movement to first construct the Amazigh consciousness, and then also to make Amazigh feel that they are actually able to produce thought and literature and aesthetics. And we should not actually underestimate the importance of reading poetry and literature in your own language. As somebody who speaks like several languages, the pleasure and the sentiments that I derive from reading poetry or a novel in Tamazigh is definitely not the same as when I read it in French or in Arabic or in any other language. So it's this awareness that would lead to the birth of what's called the new Amazigh literature. The new Amazigh literature means that in the past, the literature of the past was oral. It was based on orality. It was legends, proverbs, short stories, tales. But Amazigh never wrote, like the older generations of Amazigh before the 1900s, never wrote long narratives. They did not write short stories. Everything remained oral. So in the 80s, a new generation of Amazigh actually decided to construct a literary field. And this literary field was slowly built through summer schools, through gatherings, through poetic gatherings, through writing workshops. And there is something that went hand in hand with thinking about writing, was also thinking about the critical language that was needed in order to actually study and look into this literature. So it was kind of like a multi-pronged project. First, to create literature, to create poetry, to create stories and novels in Tamazigh, to do translation, but also understanding that Tamazigh as a language had not evolved or was marginalized for a very long time, that it did not have the critical language people needed in order to study this language. So that's when they would invent, for example, words like Amazigh to say this theater. They invented the word ongal to say this is the novel, and so on and so forth. So it's a holistic project that started particularly in the 1980s. And so some of the works that were published in the 1980s include, for example, Tabrat, Brahim El Guabli's poetry collection, تيميتار علي أزيكو's poetry collection, الشعر الأمازيغي المكتوب المنسوب إلى سيدي حمو, for example, the Amazigh poetry attributed to Sidi Hammou, تسليت نونزار, Tifawin, and Ustan Sammirlin. And all of this are works, as you will see, there is a prevalence of poetry in these works. Because at that time, the activists were just trying to kind of like write as much as they can. And Amazigh language is actually a very poetic language. And poetry was probably the art that's the most developed art in Tamazigh was poetry. And then the activists picked that up and worked on it, and they produced several poetry collections in the 1980s. The 1980s also witnessed these dialogues between Francophone writers and Amazigh activists. And I can think about Abdelkabir Khatibi, Drish Shraibi, Muhammad Khairuddin. Muhammad Khairuddin is the only Amazigh, but Khatibi is not Amazigh, nor was Drish Shraibi. But these people somehow understood the importance of supporting the Amazigh literary cause and also the Amazigh linguistic and cultural demands. I think the reason the Francophone writers actually supported this project was because they could relate to it. Their legitimacy was questioned by the Arabist camp. The Arabists, like the Arab nationalists, were like, no, Tamazigh is not a language. French is a colonial language, so anything that was not Arabic was not accepted. And Khatibi, as a major Moroccan theorist, actually, I don't know how many people have read his book, Le Maghreb Pluriel, the plural Maghreb. I think my argument is that he actually wrote that book through his encounter with the Amazigh culture movement. That's in his dialogues with the Amazigh culture movement, he developed his concept of a plural Maghreb that's not only Arab, but that's also open to several identities and stuff and so on. It's also in the 80s, the late 1980s, that an Amazigh cinema developed, particularly specifically in 1989. And one of the people that I would like to talk about is Ali Sidqi Azeiku. You can see his work. Just so that you can get an idea about how these people were. Like, they really had a mission. And their mission is to put Amazigh language and culture on the map of not just of North Africa, but on the map of humanity. Ali Sidqi Azeiku was a historian. He was a poet. He was a literary critic. He wrote studies. I mean, he was just a phenomenal person. He was also a polemicist. Like, if you go back to read all his archives and see like the battles that he fought for the word Tamazigh to be accepted, the articles that he wrote for people inciting them to just write. He's like, just write. It doesn't matter the quality of what you write. We have to depart from the orality of our heritage to be able to enter into this new era of producing literature. So here is like one of his poems. He says, awalinu gana mazigurt nisniyan usinur dimik madis darnasi sihush. Nikika bdaytya galn awal nkhuguln iza kan gom gerd il sinu dernukan. So, and this is a very interesting period also in the history of this poetry, because in the 80s, the focus was not really on aesthetics and the beauty of poetry or what you produce, like the quality of what you produce. It was more a transitional period from gaining awareness of the Amazigh cause as an indigenous cause to actually move into or creating a written Amazigh literature, which is called the New Amazigh literature. But you can see the mark of complaining and the mark of identity being very predominant. It was a period to assert the identity of Amazigh as and their language and their suffering in the 80s. And you can find so many models of this if you look at what was written. So what's the afterlife of all this work that was done in the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s? I think what developed is what I call Amazighitude, which is a process that allows us to gain consciousness of our Amazigh indigeneity and work to restore our critical decolonized self. And when I think not everybody in North Africa today has reached this Amazigitude, or this state in which you can actually reconcile your Amazigh identity with your other identities. Like you see yourself as Amazigh, but also straddling different identities. I mean, I'm Amazigh, but I teach Arabic, and I'm absolutely coherent in these identities, and they don't see them as being mutually exclusive. But I'm also very critical of the repressive condition that Tamazight went through for 50 years, right? And so many more Amazigh intellectuals, writers, thinkers are gaining this Amazigitude, but it's taking time. There is the revival of Tifinagh. Of course, if you look at this alphabet, this is the Amazigh alphabet called Tifinagh. So the revival of Tifinagh as an Amazigh alphabet that becomes the symbolic alphabet of the Amazigh identity. Then also developing this, particularly in the 1990s, Amazigh as a human rights issue. Some Amazigh activists went to the Vienna Human Rights Conference in 1993, and that's actually where they encountered this idea of indigeneity. So in the past, before 1993, Amazigh would say, Al-Barbar hum sukkan al-Maghrib al-Awwalun. Okay, the Berbers are Morocco's first inhabitants, okay? But then they go to Vienna and they encounter the fact that they had a choice between either being on a committee on indigenous rights or a committee on minority rights. And these two lawyers sit together. This person told me the story personally. He's like, we sat together and we're like, no, we're not a minority. We're indigenous, you know? And that's when they pick up this idea of indigeneity and they bring it to Morocco. So now, like, you can imagine that you move from the local to the global. Like Amazigh are now conversing with people from Latin America, from the United States, from New Zealand, from Australia, and they are internalizing the language and the issues, despite the fact, again, that within Morocco itself, within the Amazigh culture movement itself, there was a division between those who accepted this language of indigeneity and those who didn't. Like the founder of the association that I talked about, الجمعية المغربية للبحث والتبادل الثقافي in 1966, he writes in his memoir, he says, when Ahmad al-Dgharni and Hassan ibn al-Qasim came back from Vienna, and they brought this idea of indigeneity and they explained it to us more. We realized that it does not apply to us as Amazigh because we are builders of civilization, something like this. And it's very interesting to see that for him, indigeneity means something like primitive, not civilized. And of course, there is a long debate among Amazigh activists still ongoing today, and particularly because a lot of them are influenced by the French connection, because in the French context, actually, indigeneity is not accepted as a framework to study some of these questions. So if you go to France and you're at a conference and you give a talk about indigeneity, just be prepared that you will be attacked for that. And then really what happened also is like this establishment of a literary corpus, a cinematic corpus, and then the invention of a critical language to actually, so you move from language to meta language. And the result is what I would say is a totally Amazighized public sphere. If you look, these are Moroccan administrations, Moroccan streets. You walk in Rabat and Casablanca, you feel that you're like in Montreal, in a totally different world. For me, it's a dissonance because I walk and I think about the streets that I remember written in Arabic and French, and now I see these ones, and it can't make me I just feel proud that I belong to this space. And then also the literary corpus is growing. There are over 200 novels written in Tamazigh, so many short stories, so many poetry collections. And what I would like to say is that civil society plays an important role in all of this. This association, Tierra, Tirra means the writing in Tamazight, has been producing a lot of literature. And this is a civil society organization, and it's run by people who don't get paid, but they are doing this for the cause, and they are doing the editing, they are doing the publications, but they are receiving some money from the Ministry of Culture. And the work they're doing is just phenomenal. And and actually what Khadija is going to read from is some of the publications that she did with them. And just to conclude, I would like to say that Amazigitude, or this state of critical consciousness or gaining awareness of one's indigeneity, has resulted in the restoration or rehabilitation of the Amazigh self. Like we went from a state in which, as an Amazigh person, you had to feel ashamed of being Amazigh. You had to hide you being Amazigh. You were mocked. Your accent was a problem, to actually being proud of that. Self-assertion within a predominantly anti-Amazigh state. We have to distinguish between people and the state. Although most of Moroccans are very peaceful and, like easygoing and all of that, but state policy itself for 50 years was really exclusive of Tamazight, trying to reach this ideal of Arab nationalism and Muslim Ummah, despite the fact that Amazigh are Muslim, and also despite the fact that a lot of Amazigh speak Arabic. The recognition of the internal diversity without accepting minoritization, this is also very important. And the Moroccan Association for Research and Cultural Exchange developed this amazing concept that I think was really like prescient for its time. Its motto was Al-Wahda fi Tanawwa, unity in diversity. So we're all united, but we're also very diverse in our identities. And then the revalorization of popular culture as an important thing, because when you distinguish between high culture and low culture, of course, that creates problems. And then the reconfiguration of the public sphere in Morocco, like now street signs, the media, even food now is written in Tamazight, which is again fascinating. Like you sit in your kitchen and you see tifinar, and for you as an Amazigh person, that's really important. It's not something that you can ignore, that you can see Tamazight on your food. So it brings it back home in ways that were not possible in the 1980s or the 1990s. So yeah, I will be reading from Khadija will be reading this, but I think Atlas is going to present first, and then thank you. So our next speaker is Atlas Phoenix, who possesses a diverse array of expertise and talents. He serves as an adjunct professor of Arabic at the City University of New York, where he instructs students in the Arabic language. Additionally, Atlas functions as an English as a second language instructor, providing language acquisition guidance to individuals with varying linguistic backgrounds. Phoenix operates as a freelance translator, facilitating communication between Amazigh, Arabic, and English languages. Beyond his linguistic pursuits, he's a skilled musician specializing in Gnawa music, a traditional genre from North Africa. Phoenix showcases his artistic work as an Amazigh poet, crafting poignant verse that reflects his cultural heritage. His multifaceted engagements exemplify a commitment to scholarship, language proficiency, and artistic expression. Please welcome Atlas. So he's going to read and sing some of the poems that he translated. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brahim, for the details, the historical details, and putting us in context. I would like to thank everybody who contributed to this, everybody who invested energy and time to make this happen. So thank you so much, guys. I'll be brief. Basically, I selected Izenzarn as a topic. Izenzarn is a band in North Africa. Speaking of revolution and what do you call it? resistance, Amazigh resistance. So Izenzarn is a good example because they became very successful, and also they managed to create their own genre that we call Izenzarn, the rays of the sun. So the context, the historical context Izenzarn appeared in is very troubling, is very, we call it the years of the bullet, the 70s and the 80s, especially with the two coup d'etat that happened to Hassan, the late Hassan II. So he just started to go after, after critics and after anybody who's sharing anything that would be against him. So that's why Izenzarn, at times they were like they're like very plain and clear, but most of the time they would use an obscure language, like they would use symbolism, and they would use like very archaic, I would say, like Shakespearean terminology that even Berbers would, need to like do a lot to understand. So, and I'm also like one of those, translating their songs. I translated all their songs, and it took me about like 2 years of investigation. Like it's not every day, but I investigated. I had to talk. I had to ask questions. I had to so that I can give the best translation possible. What I was going to say. So yeah, there's nothing to add to what Brahim had said. From my perspective, the way I see it, I'm not here to romanticize like Amazigh. I think that everybody, all nations, to be human is to be traumatized. We are all traumatized. There are people who know about, who are aware, and I think like all humans should be aware of this trauma. That we didn't choose, because when we are aware, then we start to think about solutions. But Amazigh or Amazigh people or Berbers, as they're known in literature, they're just like other human beings. It's just in a different frequency. So Amazigh served all civilizations. First of all, the context is very important, because Amazigh exists in intersection, in an intersection we call Mediterranean, North African. So this is basically like the heart of, of everything back in the day. So like they coexisted with, no, they served and coexisted, of course, with the ancient Egyptians. They even ruled ancient Egypt for 300 years, one of Berber kings. He also, took over Egypt by force in a way. But that's basically the norm of ancient civilizations. They served the Roman civilization. They wrote, the first novel was written, they took like the foreign names. So we lived in this alienation. We have always been living in this alienation, but we also learned from it, and we also like empowered ourselves from this alienation. So, but we served different civilizations, but the Amazigh never took credit, because the sense of nationalism, Berber nationalism, started, like Brahim said, in the 60s. And I would like to, because after the independence of Algeria and Morocco, basically, and Tunisia, especially Morocco and Algeria, a wave of immigrants migrated to France and other Francophone countries in Europe. So they basically attended French schools, and they learned from it, and they came back with a sense of, awareness, or like Berber nationalism. That's when everything started. But back in the day, even our militants were like very religious. And at a certain point, with the what do you call it, the decline of or the loss of Andalusia, because the Berbers also like they played a huge part in colonizing Spain for 500 years, and then they lost it. So that also traumatized them to the extent that they switched their satellites to Middle East. And that's when another alienation, a lot of, Berbers started to call themselves Arabs, and their rulers, they used, Arab nationalism to the extent of coercion and violence and all that stuff. So the Amazigh, they developed this kind of, what do you call it? Like forgot the name, but it's okay. All right. Let's go without further ado. Let's go to these songs. So what I'm gonna do, I selected few songs. I'm just gonna show you guys the translation, and I'm gonna be singing. I'll try, I'll try to sing. I'll try to remember. But in case I forget, I have these, like the original songs with me here. But let's do it. So the first song is Till-less Darkness. نقابو تفالن وضان يليح غارسي كلو ميلان ورزار فلاتي تاكلني كلو ميلان ورزار فلاتي تاكلني عنداني قضادي غنقين منيتن يومني عنداني قضادي غنقين منيتن يومني ورمو طول قمادي سكايك شمتي لسي ورمو طول قمادي سكايك شمتي لسي تافوقت اللي غيقومر السول ريلاني تافوقت اللي غيقومر السول ليلاني سمي فغال قمادي كشمكا ينوش سمي فغال قمادي كشمكا ينوشي شاتنا كنج وتناقص تاتكتي وهوا طنطرن وهوا 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 Bang, 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 ding, 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 ding. Tillas, tillas, tillas أدنكا تياد تياد ودنوب مدينة غي تلاس 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 أدنكا تياد تياد ودنوب مدينة داغي من الجزيرة يسفي ويمي وراون مئريرين وفاد العيا يموت فاد لماني زوقي من الجزيرة تنجمتي توادي ويناولي العقل يقان الميزان يرايا زنزرزي العقل يقان الميزان يرايا زنسرسي الحق ضلبتني وتاني اسمكي ليلي العاق رزو نقيم سول ننيد حقي مدل تقاريد فلاسي سمكالي حقي مدل تقاريد فلاسي سمكالي وهوا ونايادي جنزمة ونايادي جنزمة ونايادي جنزم جنب اللازم دي ضفي ورزني زغالي سمو الزلطي سياس لا ترضي وسناتنا واللوح وسناتنا واللوح وسناتنا واللوح الجزدة وذا سكوري كنتي وزال دون فلاسك الرفي مشي زموال تيجان شي زموال تيجان شي زموال تيجان وريسة أزرق متي ماشي زموال تيجان وريسة أزرق متي وهوا and this is the image it's just maybe one more. I have three here, but one more. Okay, this is the storm. And by the way, Iznzarn, the main instrument is banjo and gimbri. But the Abdladi, who is the head of the band, they managed to, create his own genre in banjo. And by the way, these poems, these are fragments from different poets and everybody like didn't want to use their names. You also have intellectuals that contributed to Iznzar's songs. So they're like fragments from different Tamazgha places that Iznzarn as a band put together, and they're called the songs of Iznzarn. This one is a lead. And remember that this is the 70s and the 80s. So the years of bullets. So you could see like the spirit of the day, is a little bit dark, a little bit. But anyway, this is a lead, released in 1984. قوتو مدلو ولا يزلد يقوتو وقاق ولا وسمن يقادو مدلو ديلازي قدو نزاري مطاونة أقاق ندو زمان قان رزاس يجيوي قاتكت زاخيا بين ديو تمانيكي زوفن تتنمد زي الغدا تيجي قلنا روكان لنا ومطا أمطا يرميت ماقوس اللي حمتني ترحمنا وغار زمنا إساز زنني ونمد إروفا مزيت لنوامني وياي 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 إزديسي قول وكال وران السلسم غي نغدا مود السولو ليران نكرني وتنتي عصريا نرجع وتنتي عصريا نرجع وتنتي عصريا نرجع لزان تغيب رقاي يغلو الزان تموت لابد من يفل وتنتي عزار الجيد غلول يصبرني دي يا حمل دي سوريقي صبر الرسري جد يغيتر مو ملو يفاويني زروح نزي يرد نجود سواوال وزمزاد نفاسرت يغيتر مو ملو يفاويني زروح نزي يرد نجود سواوال وزمزاد نفاسرت مسك الزبدة مزوز يقوز ماما مدغي يقلي واسي فدرار للبحر لمن يقاد له الشبيك نقني يزل ملي يقد الغردان ميور لما نبوك ضي يقاوشينا مكزا يقاوشينا مكزا إيجاوشينا مجزا إيجازدو مسامساغ الشاوشينا مجزات جاغتي لي تغويت رقازي قات المال والعقل قانو وجي إيقوى جبير لك النزيق ما غير سيجي غير سيجي غير سيجي وياي 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 وياي. And that's the picture I chose for easily. Do we still have time for one more? Or I still have one more here. Do you guys still have time, or let's move on? One more? Okay. This one is called the tray. The tray here is a symbol of the state, country. So tray, teapot, glasses, mint and all that stuff. So like I said, the language is like they use symbolism. So this is tabla. Battıbla meşkdu bu zevele min zarrafın. Battıbla meşkdu bu zevele min zarrafın. الجدي ديت العقلية متسوتل الجدي ديت العقلية متسوتل إن دايزرين أتاياد ساني سمغورن مزاس موت ونزاد اسمو العقلية متسوتل السوتين دايزرين أتاياد ساني سمغورن إن دايزرين أتاياد ساني سمغورن هي أرتلا شبا تلا تورتيت اللي قامت وريالا لبردا يوم غيو الكيسان ختامانس تلا تاشيبا ورتلا تورتيت اللي قامت ريالا لبرد دم غيور كيسان غتامات ترزيطة الطبلة إكسوس مرغان مزدانيك زيطة الطبلة إكسوس مرغان مزدانيك لكم تيزي اللي غير سيمة القامنيسي يغن لكم تيزي اللي غير سيمة القامنيسي يغن وهلي 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 ولي ولي مزغلو تنيد الوقت ولي ولي مسكلو تنيد الوقت ولي ولي مزغلو تنيد الوقت ولي ولي مزغلو تنيد الوقت دوني توري دوم غير عمغد نوبة ور العاق دوني توري دوم غير عمغد نوبة ور العاق توداد الهام توداد الهام توداد الهام توداد الهام توداد الهام العقل أريدك تجيني مجاورا توداد الهم العقل أريدك تجيني مجاور توداد الهم العقل أريدك تجيني مجاور توداد الهم العقل أريدك تجيني مجاور وساعت يذان السنة مطاس تسرب ساعت يذان السنة مطاس تسرب ويييييو ويييييو نفرقي درت حاشا حكوساني نفرقي درت حاشا حكوساني الموت تقات انا رزيف تيرات وياني موت تقات انا رزيف تيرات وياني إيرات وياني إيراتوياني إيراتوياني السنة تروح توالى قرابسينا زمليلي والسنة تروح توالى قرابسينا زمليلي جوايا مالي لزيد الوياسي زوتلي وياسي زوتلي وياسي سوتلني وياسي سوتلني. And that's the trim. I think that's enough. Thank you guys. Thank you. But if you want more, I have more.
Yeah. Our next speaker is Khadija Ikan. Khadija is a Moroccan writer who works both with Arabic and Amazigh. She actually started writing in Arabic first, and then she switched to Tamazigh. She's a founding member of the League of Women Writers of Morocco and was responsible for the Amazigh literary file in the League's office from 2012 to 2018. Ikan has won several awards for her literature, including the 1996 Isisco Award for Short Story in the Islamic World, for When the Carmina Burana Flows, the Appreciation Award from the Royal Institute of Amazigh Culture in 2010, and the Sudanese Tayyip Saleh Prize for Written Creativity in 2011 for her short stories, Ayyam Bosnia, Bosnian Days. Khadija, are you here?
أزول
Azul Khadija, dacht slit.
يا راه نسفليت
اوكي مزيان.
صافي مزيان
بالتي يتسبد دغدغ.
واخا.
So the translations we are reading from today, I did some and another colleague did some. نرى بدوس اغرب.
إغرم داكوغ واخا. راست غير غيلة ولكن رديني خيات يتقوري أزول كيوان أزول كل مديد نخي حاضر نمرخ باهرة في دول مقارنون ديدون دروخ تسدديناد. مرحبا بالجميع. أنا سعيدة جدا بهذا اللقاء وأشكركم جميعا على هذه الدعوة الفاضلة وسعيدة بمشاركتي معكم هذه اللحظات الطيبة.
Okay, so she says Azul, which means hello in Tamazigh, and she thanks everyone who is here and welcomes everyone, and she's very happy to share these poems with the audience.
يا رد غير خيلاد تمديازتاد ليلان أدلسينو تجوز تاقبورت إغرم اللي تيجان يتمدين المنطقة الجنوب المغرب.
So Ighram is a city in the south of Morocco, and this poem is from her poetry collection Tujrut Taqbourt, which means an old fragrance.
إغرم تسليت نداو كنسوس أسونفو نويلي مدان أدقيم تفان أمارجان ليتن بدايدن الدين سدارم غتقرست إلسائي غرم أدفن السيغوسن نغالت تمغوانت إيجينو درار غتال درار أرت خمرنت تيرباتين ناس غتوغانس يتوين مركسن إبرباش نتملحافين سنت دوين يغماين نبريلو سينصق قري قرانس تال درار ستومرت يبوغ لو درار أمار يوفان أدقيسي كسا أولينس
شكرا
هم كده
خديجة.
تنمير النون.
Okay, next one, Tifinagh. So Tifinagh, we talked about the zirafa.
ناخ يا بصراحة ماني غلا اختو الجوج تقبرت نيت ولكن تيفيناغ كلولد يترمانت اختورتيتينو زمومغن يجديق الناس تقاد زازويغت يقنوان نتمازيرتينو أرس غيو خاصة غنم اغتلاس نيزلان غمضان ورت مدياز أريقاين إسكيل نمزوزر أريل الدين أرتنس قداخ أريلم أرتلم تقولي وين اكتسني وين نقلوقل أرنكرنت غير دني سقاسن أرتفي وتفيناغ زون تفوكت نمغراد أرتفيو تاغبالوت نتماقيت.
Okay, wonderful. Tamagit. So Tamagit means identity. Yeah.
استيدت أوروفيغ أبلا أكمتنايخ أرتزيقيز غغراس يغزيفن أغراسنم يتكورن سيسكراف يفض نتغاوسيوين قراتنخ ما خيليه انت قوقت زون تيتريت اللي تدل تمدلوت ياه مينش كترفوفنت ماش مادام قيخ ديخ كرانت واس تفوت السان مرادقخ.
شكرا. وياد أزوان إفريقي. So in Tamazigh, أزوان أفريقي. Yeah.
تدروت نتشاقانك أراس فركخ إنيل مخ أرتدارن يتبيرن أرتزوغنت تيزوا أردي تشكا إيقر أراك قراخ غتاورقيتينو أشكو غيقنوانينو يتمدلوت يغوفن أرتي السقف أزوانك يفولكين غيزولانك أرتطار تغلي إجان غيفسنك لقزمن يفوسن السغن أريد تمغاي وكال غولنك أريد سلغا وغوري أرتشوشوف غوالنينو تبربشتنك يفاول إنيين مخ هو ضانخ يكرم أرتبي تازرة فين تلوبانس نق يغد زون دملو ينقين تدروت نتشاقانك أراس فركخ إنيين مخيليغ تنفن يوسمو قولنك غوضانسن إدواري تران غورتانسن إدواري جديقن ما خيلي غوريسنا مضالاد أديسكر تيسلاتين غي جديقن جور جورا غي مندي نوامور غي لودي ناكليم.
تنمير شكرا. This would be yeah غلاد أجنحة النسيان.
يا في إلودي يفراون انتتوت مخ غيلت الليت أيا كتاي مخ التضيت كريقات تكليت ارتشكات فاتك تسانينو تويا نغادي زرين ما نديسيكي كان غاد نيس كراف ميش كاد فرسنت أركي غي كيسن أدزيجيز ماخ غي كتليت يا كتاي ما تقا تساروتاد لي راك فلي يقن ما تقا تفردوتاد لي سراك مزيخ فاتمزوز زرت دوادو سكرت كيكي تامغار تيتوين اغتساس تيزرين تقيتي تويانك تقتكيين أمضان نسي الزاين اللي غيتفلت إديسان اللي كريقات غوصة تقاتا قبورت مقار دزوزو اللي دسون فوسخ اللي اغتيد المقارخ واللي زران غاد نونا روز سيمانس يفولكين سيانوقر نتملانس إصفدق تكصاد نسانينو صلاغ الاثنين اللي غيت المقارخ هاكين تشكيت فطرزت أنا روز يمزين ما خغيلت الليت ما استضيت كريقات تكلات تشكيت يحبايين وينو إنايين أج غادي زرين أديمون دي فراون تاتوت.
تنمير بهرا. غلاد نرندوس أقصد أنا when you return yes thank you المدينة التي فقدت ظلها.
يا يتغرم تيجلانا سكلونس وش كيخد غيد ريزناد يقراون فوكال سنين سفورن غين نغدو شكيخ زر أزوياد اللي غطرشم آنفا تايرين نس تبرغواطيت أسيف نكريش نتوري ارتاد مقور نوزو إزوران إزداتن توزمز دوزمز يختو مارق نسموني الزان غوكال زون دا سكلو مقور انت سلت أسكلو ياد مقور نمسلي الدوت غرمت زر ديني إسراديس فضو زمز تيرير شمن غوزو نغدر دي بيمسلي نوادو غتاقانت نغدر دي السمون نغدر دي السمي غبولة إسرادي الصفد أقو ديني كراشن غتوريت يتوين غاديقن الدول بوصلان إتواتون إكاتي وورغانو أرجاز يبدن في زقن تمغار تتلمن لقطيب دوزان إرواسن إيمانينو مقور توريرت يتوين وشكيخ غيد ريزنات يقراون فوكل سنين سفور غين أغدوشكيخ ستتقى
شكرا.
إيه.
تريتا تغرت الرسول البرغواتي.
الرسول البرغواتي بلاتي تزرخ فاني غيلا ورقصة برغواتي.
القصة برغواتية.
ريخاديسان خمن غمن غداك لان تسناوين اشكون وراس نسكر خل لي
ولتي
تيتر
تبيت إلا نيتغ غوانا غيلا إلا نيتغ
يا إلا غيميسينو
إيا إتبادني تختنا
يا صافي يا إل غيميسينو أزروال أم ألنم إبرن غتوزونت جوجل تولنينو ستوشكين تنواضل اللزان في ميسينو آلنينو يجوجل غوان مبرن غتوزون تشاويت آم ميريام غوحلي قنم أرقصان أبو رغوطي يجوجل كا وهدونان يدن سوق ضرور نسين دمراون تسوت جوجل خنكين سيماني مزوزرن قرندي دغيلاد والريخ يتران الدو وهدونان يوف داري الدويخ سيات تبرير تبرغوطيت إملالين صنزير هكذا تكا
تنمير قمايات تيقميتو مليلت لولا انت تتبادني تغوانا ياك
يا بلاتي ندينو ورني خيز اختدستي تبعان
تقعد تقريبا دي السربعة
ياك ما اختلي تجالسي اسم مناد النوبارز مناد النوبارز كيورخ ماشي اختار اللي غير لا او ان اي
اشكون
ماشي
ختاد
اختار
زهرات تيترجمنا ماشي انتي
اه بلاتي اختاد حقا يا سالي تتابعان
يا
كم سنق اللي جالسي اسم غياد ماسك ياك
لا ختان تلقى يسمعون تلقى يستورد في يسمعون تلقى يستورد في البرتقيز
اياه يا اختاد ديالي لان غيلا كم سنق يسمعون قري دوفتاس نيزماز انقي انت سوتين إشقان القواغن تزومت نتوغا دار برتقيز تدارتي من لولن غزغار رشاوي وروميني كراش النيزماز السود منو أبو رغوطي إنجين زغبوس كرة سيل غيد أزغار أشوي كاتنياد تدارتي من لولن تزومت نتوغا
شكرا تنمير.
تنميرتك
I dropped a few words. There used to be a White House. That's the تنمير باهرة.
تنميرت نونو تكوني
You were reading some of the titles in Arabic. I'm very curious, and I know this is a very Arab question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about it. I apologize. But what are some of the influences, especially on Khadija's work of Arabic poetry, especially contemporary? And it's also a question for Atlas in his own work. I mean, I understand the tensions and the trauma, but you also spoke of a larger Arab identity that some
Yeah.
find coherent and some struggle with. But
Yeah.
in terms of context and influence.
So السؤال هو على تأثير أنت عربت الشعر نم تجربة نم الشعر ده ترى السؤال.
يا غادي كان السؤال ياك. بالنسبة للشعر تمديازتينو كاين خصها باش هاد نفهم يغنرا نفرك تمديازتينو خصها زوارة نزر ما من كاس هذيك الشمخ كاين سيغراد نتي الراس تمازيغت
واخا بلاتي. So
Yeah.
to understand my poetry and examine it, I first need to talk a little bit about how I got into writing poetry in Tamazgha.
Yeah.
يلا.
كي ختن سي زوار ارتراخ ستعرفت غيك اللي شكو مثلا غل المنطقة نتمازيرت نخنقنين المغرب تكات نتعربت غل مرحلة ممكن ايلان اختينمن يعني غريخت يسانخت ارسل ستراخ
واخا.
ولكن
So in my generation, Arabic was central in our education, and I learned Arabic, and I started by writing in Arabic. يلا زيد.
من بعد اللي ارتراخ تلايت تغوسا اللي تيقان هو تيغرين تعربت ورتمون توسنا نتعربت حتى ديقان يعني الفكرة مكلين كير تسنيخ تعربت من دايما قال يعني اللغة عربية ولكن يعني لا تندمج بشكل كبير وموثق جدا جدا 100% بالثقافة العربية كان هناك اختلاف.
So for her, she discovered the dissonance between learning Arabic as a language and using it, but also the fact that Arabic does not carry for her like Arab culture. So there is a difference between the culture and the language that she learned in school.
يعني كي تعزى داري اللغة العربية أرسس التراخ مش و يعني أرتقراخ الأدبيات العربية ولكن غيك النيخ وداسيا التأثير غتوسنا يعني إلا داري اطلاع انفتاح على الثقافة العربية على ثقافات عديدة حينما كتبت باللغة الأمازيغية أو انتقلت يعني من العربية الأمازيغية ولكن ليس انفصال يعني انتقال ولكنه ليس انفصال عن اللغة العربية كتبت بلغة أمازيغية ولكن انطلاقا من هوية أمازيغية منفتحة على ثقافات عديدة منها العربية ومنها ثقافات أخرى.
Well, she said a lot of things that you would be able to capture, but the most important thing is that Arabic for her is a language that she loves and that she studied and she writes in. But as I said, the discovery of the dissonance between knowing the language and actually being able to carry the culture that you're trying to express are two different things. And she said that she's open-minded about languages and she knows other languages that she's open to, but in her writing is a writing from a sense of Amazigh identity.
إصدار هذا كاينين خاز تلاقي المسألة اللي هي تماما كت يعني الكيفية ناخذ الأسلوب يعني في الشعر الأمازيغي ناخذ اللغة الأمازيغية للمدخ تعلمت يعني أساليب عديدة من قراءات عديدة عالمية نتعلم ولكن في نفس الوقت أنا أنطلق من هوية تحتاجني من هوية أمازيغية كانت يعني هي التي تدفعني أكثر إلى التعبير عنها. إذن فالكتابة سواء كانت بالعربية أو بالأمازيغية تحمل إحساس مغربي أكثر هوياتي أكثر يلتقي مع الإنساني والكوني يعني يمكن أن يحس به مثقف عربي مثقف أوروبي مثقف كيف ما كان نوعه.
So her readings in different languages and her learning of like stylistic ways of writing poetry has many confluences in other languages, including Arabic. But the essence of what she tries to do is centered around her Amazigh Moroccan identity, but it's also an identity that's open to the human. Therefore, like the Arab, the non-Arab can feel what she's trying to do with her work. Shukran, Tanmirt.
Oui, تنمير.
What I would like to add is that Arabic is also part of our identity. And many of our intellectuals, writers, poets, they all read in Arabic, and they benefited from Arabic in a positive way, not just Arabic, also French. So there you go.
ما أريد قوله هو أن اللغة العربية يعني أن كثير من الأمازيغ كتبوا باللغة العربية واستفادوا من اللغة العربية واللغة الفرنسية في أدبهم.
نعم.
Yeah, just use this one. Yeah, the influence of Arabic is really clear in like the literary tradition, because the generation he was talking about, the models that were available to them. Khadija belongs to a later generation in the spectrum of Amazigh poetry. So the earlier generation, the models they had were Arabic literature. Georgi Zaidan, you know, like Najib Mahfoud, you know, Haidar, and Badr Shakir al-Siyab, like the free verse school and all of that. So, of course, the impact of Arabic on the development of Amazigh literature is very clear, both in the writing of the novel, in the writing of poetry, in the writing of short story, particularly because there were people also who were actually, this is a very significant difference between Morocco and Algeria, is that almost all the Moroccan activists who started the Amazigh culture movement were Arabists. They were trained in the Quran. They went to the Ma'had, the Islamic Institute in Darudant. It is a very important school. So they were equally versed in Arabic and Tamazigh later. So it was actually their contact with Arabic that formed the embryo of the literary and the aesthetics of in Tamazigh. But of course, for later generations, these experiences became more open. First of all, because they found this foundation to build on and know what's being done with Amazigh poetry and the Amazigh novel is we can be said that now it's really like within the Amazigh soil itself that it's developing. But of course, as people who are trained in Arabic, like we learn Arabic in Morocco at age 7. So when you're 7, you go to the school and you learn Arabic and it becomes your language. So you cannot really give it up and just kind of like liberate yourself from it, because it's part of who you are, and your readings and your taste for literature and reading is shaped by this language. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So when I was telling her, because I was kind of like doing also another reverse translation from Tamazight into Arabic, so that she can find these poems quickly in her book.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Brahim.